Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to Part 1 of the Blue Hornet 2015 Consumer Views of Email Marketing webinar series. Our presenters today are Chris Frazier, the Senior Director of Customer Success at Blue Hornet, and Melissa Shaw, Founding Partner and Head of Strategy at Shaw Scott. Chris joined the Blue Hornet account management team in 2007 and uses his 11 years of sales and marketing experience to create service models and marketing strategies that support our customers' email marketing success. He leads all of our client-facing service teams, including account management, training and education, deliverability management, strategy, and professional services. Melissa is an accomplished digital strategist who has specialized in email marketing since the field's inception more than 15 years ago. She tackles complex business challenges by immersing herself in the world of each brand, and her proven ability to drive revenue for her customers has made her a recognized industry leader. She's developed and optimized marketing programs for brands including Alaska Airlines, BMW, Virgin Airlines, Costco, Wells Fargo, Chanel, and Make-A-Wish. Before co-founding Shaw & Scott, Melissa served as Director of Strategic Services for Oracle Responses. This is the fourth year Blue Hornet has published our Consumer Views of Email Marketing report. We developed the questionnaire, and it was fielded by Flagship Research in an online survey of 1,815 U.S. customers. Respondents were representative of the U.S. population between 18 and 64 years of age. Gender, income, and regional distribution was also reflected in the U.S. population. There's a lot of really good news for marketers in our findings this year. Consumer expectations are high, but if you meet them, they will engage and convert. They're paying attention to email and acknowledge its impact on their buying behavior. They know we're gathering data on them, and they expect us to use it when we communicate with them. They want easy, secure buying experiences regardless of device, and they're picky when it comes to sharing messages with their social networks. Chris and Melissa will now take us through the email usage and mobile email findings and insights and provide you with recommendations you can apply to your email program. We'll start with email usage. Chris?
Thanks, Kim. Good morning and afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. Melissa and I are excited to share the results of our research study this year. So starting with our first question, this is a question that we've asked for a number of years now as part of our Consumer Views study, and that is, how many addresses in terms of email, of course, do you have? And we were pleasantly surprised to see that the number is decreased this year to 2. And knowing that this has been as high as 4 in the past, this is really starting to get encouraging in terms of lessening the so-called uphill battle email marketers have in terms of getting the right email address to get the most engagement out of their subscribers. One thing I did want to call out here is our younger respondents, those are people under 34, were much more likely, 40% of them, to use a separate email address for marketing and advertising messages. So that's an important call out in terms of how you segment and testing for your younger demographics. But all in all, 71% of respondents are not using a separate email address for marketing and advertising emails. That's a major plus again. And this really starts to go to debunking the myth that email marketers have had to contend with for a number of years now in terms of getting the right email address. So once you have the right email address and you're getting mail to subscribers' active email address, your next step is really around how you get them engaged, and that's centered around subject lines generally. So Melissa, what are some of the hot tips in regards to subject lines?
So this may not sound like a particularly sexy topic in 2015, but you can't ignore the fact that subject lines are really one of the most important tools in our toolkit for capturing attention of subscribers. So a couple of ideas on how you can really capture attention. First and foremost, I really like to focus on the interplay between the subject line and the pre-header. It's really important to make sure that those two pieces of copy really work together. They shouldn't be identical, but there should be a payoff between what you see in the subject line and then that little snippet of text that you see at the top of the email even before you open. Some other ideas, it's always very interesting to start with a list. So something like top 10 most purchased items, 5 most pinned articles, that type of thing. Can't go wrong with that tactic. Wherever possible, create a real sense of urgency, and also, if you have data elements that you can personalize on, that's a great thing to bring into the subject line. So that can obviously go well beyond just saying, Melissa, here's deals for you. It can refer to any data element that you've got in your database. And one question I get often is, what about symbols? And we're certainly seeing a lot of marketers using that tactic. It's a little bit trendy. I do think it can be effective, but it's a tactic that you want to use very sparingly. The more you use it, the less impactful it will be. And then think about not just slapping a symbol on there. It really should kind of work cohesively with the theme of that campaign and the theme of that subject line. Those are just a couple of ideas.
Great, thank you. So moving on, this is our first key finding. I feel like we should have some background sound effects or something here. But we asked, how many times per day do you check email? And again, this is really exciting for all of us in the digital and email marketing space. 39% of our respondents said that they check it up to 3 times a day. And perhaps even more exciting is over a third of respondents said they just actively check it all day long. So what we're getting at here is that, time of day sending may not be as important as it once was. And the opportunity to test and really get aggressive of when you're sending and perhaps how much you're sending in a single day is really opening up here. One thing that you're going to hear us talk about a couple of times today is the need to understand when you're getting engagement in terms of open and click-through versus when you're actually getting conversion. And how do you use this data along with testing to understand how you optimally make those things work together. And we have a couple of examples ahead, and Melissa's going to talk a little bit about that as well. But the net, this data really opens up an opportunity to think, really think around time of day sending may not be as important as it once was in the past. All right. So speaking of day and time of sending, our first example here from the real world, this is from Alan Edmonds. And so they did a pretty basic A/B test, one going at 8:30 in the morning, one going at 10:30 in the morning. So in general, engagement was roughly the same, but the 10:30 one, so the later send, the 10:30 a.m. send, that is, had a 225% increase in actual revenue over the earlier send. So this kind of goes to the fact that even if you may see some higher engagement, that may not be what's ultimately producing the most revenue for your brand. So again, testing is super important on this topic. All right, so moving on to other examples from the real world in terms of time of day sending and how you get the most effective from an open engagement rate. So the next information we're looking at is from Take Part. Take Part is part of Participant Media. They're a Los Angeles-based social activist content provider. So they're very much like a media or news organization. So they've done a couple of really interesting tests. One is when is the best day of the week or best time to send their heaviest amount of content, and that would be their weekly newsletter. And then also, obviously they want to be engaged and updating their loyal followers on a daily basis. So how do they find the most optimal time every day to send content out? And so through a series of testing, they've actually found Saturday is their best day of the week to send their weekly newsletters, which again have the most content. And that, to us as email marketers makes a lot of sense in terms of people generally have more leisure time on Saturdays and can take in maybe less time-sensitive information versus during the week. And then another cool thing they've discovered is kind of against what retail brands are doing. Every morning you wake up and you have a load of emails from retail companies in your email box. They've actually found that sending in the evening at 6 p.m. Pacific time in this case gives them a lot more engagement. So a much higher open rate, as you can see, and click-through rate and upwards of 33% higher than if they send in the morning. So by testing, and this is pretty simple testing again, they've discovered a way to really drive up their engagement rates.
So to summarize the action items based on the data that we've shared so far, it's really important to keep in mind that subscribers are checking your emails all day long. So they're on the go, they might be at work, they might be commuting to or from work, on the bus or whatnot. So that really underscores for us as marketers the absolutely critical need to make sure that your email campaigns are designed for optimal viewing across all device types. So not just the desktop or laptop, but also the mobile phone, the tablet, et cetera. We do think time of day testing might be decreasing. If it is something that you're still doing, we urge you to have a look at the data from the point of view of your business and look at things like conversion rate. So not just opens and clicks if you're a retailer or, say, for example, a travel company, but you also want to understand when people are more likely to take an action from your campaign. So as Chris was sharing in those examples, it's really important to test and see what works for your brand. So now we're going to move into some data on device type. And I think this first slide here won't be a surprise to anyone. So we asked the question, what devices do you use to check your email? And the vast majority of everyone in the survey said that they use a desktop or laptop to check their email. No surprise there. The penetration on smartphone usage is really increasing. So it's at 67% today, which exactly mirrors the data out there on smartphone penetration within the U.S. So no big surprises. Then followed in third place by tablet, and also very, very, very small adoption so far of people reading email on their app-enabled television. So that didn't surprise us. One quick call out, amongst 18 to 24-year-olds, they're much more likely to have a smartphone. So next we asked people what device they primarily use to check their email, and this was pretty interesting. This was actually a bit of a surprise to us. So across all respondents, we saw that nearly 2/3 still say that their laptop or their desktop is the primary device that they're using to check email. And we actually expected to see a higher penetration of people saying their smartphone was their primary device, but that wasn't the case across the board. However, when you look at that younger audience again, that 18 to 24-year-old group, we did see a shift. So amongst that group, more than half say that their smartphone is their primary device. So of course, this just underscores the importance for every brand to have a look at this breakdown for your particular audience, because that will obviously drive some decisions that you make about email design and your creative approach.
Great. So we wanted to take a reality check here. So as digital marketers, we know that often what consumers or subscribers are doing is very different from what they say they're going to do. So we just heard from Melissa on what they say they're going to do, and what we wanted to do is look at what are people actually doing. So we took aggregated our top retail clients here at Blue Hornet and looked at actually what they are seeing. And what we see is actually kind of a contradiction in the data versus what Melissa just reviewed in terms of what our panel said. So we're showing that actually we're getting a lot more mobile activity in terms of open rates than on desktop. So it's important to look at both sides of the coin, so to speak. All right, so let's look at our action items and hot tips for this area. So what we have here is a handful of really good, what are pretty generally accepted best practices now for mobile email design. So let's go through these quickly. First off, long gone are the days that you can have a template that's 700 or 800 pixels wide. Your standard template should really be somewhere in the neighborhood of 300, 400, maybe 500 pixels wide. That's starting to push it. The next concept is really, placement of call to action and the size of it. You need to remember, people are not just using their index finger now. They're now using their thumb to take action on your email, which is only making it more difficult for designers. But because of that, your call to action should really be at least 44 by 44 pixels wide. Again, think about, people are using maybe 1 digit or 2 digits, including their thumb. So you really need to make it easy for them to interact with your email. And remember, they're in control of how they're going to interact with your email. So you really need to accommodate what they've got going on there. And then this next step is really around a best practice that's been in the email space for at least 10 years, and that is provide a prominent call to action. And one of the key ways you do that is making sure that it's above the fold in your email. And a good rule of thumb is include it in the first 300 pixels. So this is not only your call to action, but it's the clickable call to action as well, so the button or whatnot. And in general, all of these things go to building an approach that eliminates clutter and allows the subscriber to instantaneously understand what you're showing them or trying to get across to them, both messaging and design-wise. And just remember, people are receiving more email than ever, so don't make them work for it. They will not do extra effort to understand what you've got going on. You've got to meet their needs in terms of design from the gate. Straight out of the gate, that is. Okay, so moving on to our next question. How often do you prefer to hear from companies that send you marketing and advertising email? So again, some really exciting findings here. You should get pumped up here. Over 44% of people said they thought about weekly was right for them to receive a message from brands that they've signed up for. So some of you are probably going, oh, I already send way more than weekly. I'll address that in just a second here. But there are a lot of marketers out there that don't send weekly, and this may open up a door for them to send a little more frequently. You'll also note here that 24% of respondents said they prefer to hear from marketers up to several times a week or even daily. So again, there is a slice of your database that is willing to hear from you all the time. Of course, with that comes some pretty good or high expectations from you as a marketer in terms of your segmentation as well as content relevancy and those kinds of things. Just because people want to hear from you more frequently, they don't, they're still asking for those things to be in a relevant format. All right.
So we wanted to share an example of a terrific preference center. This one is from art.com, and we wanted to call out this example because they do a really fantastic job of providing their subscribers with some choices around frequency. So this is something that they land the subscriber on during the actual opt-in process. And then they also drive people to this page from their welcome series and from some promotional campaigns. So it's very easily accessible for subscribers. And in addition to giving those frequency choices, they've done a really beautiful job of creating this visual depiction of different preferences. So because they're a company that sells artwork, they're showing you these thumbnail images that help the subscriber hone in on what's your design style, what type of art are you interested in buying, and then they use that data to help drive personalization throughout their promotional and lifecycle campaigns. So we thought this was a really particularly effective example of giving the consumer choices and control over how they hear from you and what they hear from you.
Yeah, I love this example. It really shows that brands can be getting a lot more innovative with their preference center, and art.com is certainly pushing the trend in terms of that. So looking at another example of a brand giving their subscribers control over content, this example is from Lululemon Athletica. So you can see a much simpler in terms of what they're asking or what kinds of options they're giving their guest, but it is very straight to the point and focused around men's, women's, or if you want it all. And so we selected this just because of its simplicity and effectiveness.
So to recap this section, the takeaways here are there is no magic bullet for frequency. There is no one-size-fits-all frequency. Every brand needs to do some testing and deeper dive into their own data to figure out what that optimal frequency is. And then I'd also really like to encourage you not to look at frequency across your entire file, but to look at different segments or pockets within your list, identify those real brand enthusiasts, and consider pushing the frequency higher for that group, because almost every brand has that group of real loyalists that would tolerate a higher frequency. So the rule of thumb here is make sure you're doing some testing, do those tried and true methods, and then just follow that overall golden rule around being relevant is send a campaign when you actually have something relevant to say. So not just getting locked into a set schedule, but thinking about how people are behaving and really moderating your frequency, for example, seasonally as things are shifting in the marketplace.
Great. Before we move on to the next section, Kim is asking me to remind you all, if you have questions, please feel free to be submitting those as we go along. We should have time at the end, and we'll address as many of those as possible.
Thanks, Chris.
Great. So we have another key insight here, and this is absolutely fascinating to me. We asked consumers what interactions they expect companies to use to personalize marketing or advertising emails, and the results just were so incredibly strong. So what we found here is that consumers are becoming more savvy than ever. A staggering almost 75% have the expectation that marketers personalize their email campaigns based on behavior that's happening on the website. So 3/4 of all the respondents are expecting that kind of personalization. Also, 70% are expecting personalization based on data fields that they supplied in their preference center or profile. So the bar is really high. Consumers are expecting you to listen and pay attention to those digital cues that they're getting and actually leverage that data to communicate with them. Moreover, more than half are expecting you to use things like the birth date, what they're looking at on the website, gender, and even 37% are expecting you to be able to take their offline buying behavior and apply that online. So I know oftentimes I get the question, will my subscribers think it's creepy if I'm sending them campaigns based on their behavior, or will I come across as seeming big brotherish? And I think what our data is showing here is that no, they won't find that creepy. In fact, they have that expectation now that they're expecting marketers to really be listening to their behavior and providing an experience that's highly personalized and customized based on where they are in the life cycle.
Melissa, do you think marketers can just throw the big brother concern out the window, or is there still an element of using data savvy that they need to maintain?
That's a great question. So I think this tactic is very expected these days, but there's a lot of nuance in how you execute it. So when you're looking at different creative treatments and how you're actually presenting this information, you do want to be careful about not just saying, hey, we're following your every move online. We noticed you looked at these 5 things. There's a subtlety to it, right? So you're serving up images of products they've searched and saying something like, hey, we thought you might be interested in this. So yes, you do need to still think about the presentation of this information and present it in a context that's not creepy. Very
good. All right, so let's look at some real-world examples again. So we're looking at some examples from Allen Edmonds here. This is their post-purchase personalization series. So obviously, they're using a lot of data from their subscribers, both from a browse and a transaction perspective here. So starting on the left, your typical thank you transaction, but you can see in the right sidebar they are personalizing with some upsell and complementary products to what the customer is just purchasing. A few weeks later, they are again upselling some complementary products, which is working well for them. And then down the road, Allen Edmonds shoes aren't exactly inexpensive, so they're teaching people how to take care of them. So they have some great products that are not only upsell opportunities for Allen Edmonds, but also they actually help the subscribers. So there's an educational component to these communications as well. And then finally, close to a year later, they're starting to educate their customer about the recrafting program, which they're well known for, and it's actually pretty cool. I mean, they have all kinds of stories about customers who have had, shoes from their great-grandfather that have been passed through and recrafted. So that's a really exciting process for them. One thing I did want to call out about this series is you might be saying email number 2, which is the belt email, looks like it has a lot more room for personalization in terms of what product they're displaying. So I can tell you that Allen Edmonds has actually tested just displaying a belt that matches the shoe that was purchased originally. And they've actually found that their customers respond and convert from a revenue perspective at a lot higher of a rate when they show this more broad spectrum or various products. So it's a good lesson in over-personalizing isn't always the right tactic, and it's important to test and find out what works for your audience specifically, and that's how you're going to be most successful. Right. So looking at another example of personalization, gender in this case, these are 2 great examples from PacSun. So obviously the one on the left, the creative on the left is for guys, and the one on the right is for the ladies. So this can be a really effective tactic in serving up some very relevant and applicable product images and so forth. The one word of caution that we want to have or share with you today is that this is a tactic that you shouldn't use every time you send a message. This is something you want to test into, make sure your audience is responding, and so forth. As an example, Melissa might appreciate receiving the lady's image sometimes, but she also probably buys clothes for her son. So, sometimes the guy products are going to be applicable to her. So that's a good example of where you want to mix and test and make sure that you're not just sticking to one type of personalization to drive your entire strategy.
So next we wanted to highlight a brand that we thought is doing a really fantastic job with a cohesive life cycle strategy, and that's Alaska Airlines. So they have a whole host of programs that are data-driven, and they're based on a variety of different data elements, both implicit and explicit. So they're really doing a fantastic job of listening to customers and subscribers and touching them at various points throughout the life cycle. So I've called out just a couple of examples here. They have both an abandoned cart email that happens when you get all the way down the booking path and you abandon for whatever reason. In the travel industry, a lot of times people are flipping back and forth between alternate sites because they're doing price comparison. Alaska also has a browse abandonment campaign. So for registered or recognized website subscribers, people who are on the site just browsing around looking at different destinations, you'll get a similar but slightly different campaign that says, hey, are you still planning on booking your trip to XYZ destination? They also have a really lovely surprise and delight campaign that goes out in the month of your birthday. So all airlines are required to capture birth date at the point of purchase. So they have that data, and they use that as an opportunity to solidify that relationship with the customer. So these are just a few examples. They do all kinds of things like encourage you to reach your next tier or to acknowledge when you achieve a certain status in the loyalty program, welcoming you into the mileage program. So this is a brand that I think is doing a particularly effective job at leveraging their customer data for those highly personalized communications. Great.
And we thought we'd include one oops situation because everybody likes to look at a car crash. So this is an example, actually an email that Kim received, and you can see it's addressed to Kim in the to line, but they've called her Megan in the subject line. So just a call out and a reminder that you really need to test the validity of your data and ensure that the population technology that you're using and so forth is working correctly, because I can guarantee you Kim isn't going to be buying any kind of guides to being successful on mobile from this company. All right. So looking at action items and hot tips from this section, really the key is about being an active listener as the marketer. and making sure you're acting on both explicit and implicit data that you have now at your fingertips. And a key part of being able to do that is ensuring that you're set up for success in the way that you've organized and aggregated that data. So really partnering with your IT and data teams to ensure that however they've got things tied together and is outputting is going to be in a quality way that you can reuse that for both segmentation and personalization. And the next tip is really around ensuring that you're using current data. People, to start off with, we're living in a very fast-moving age today, and what people did a year or 2 years ago, maybe even 6 months ago, may not be applicable to right now. And so if you're not actively collecting data and using that to update your strategies, and including segmentation and personalization, we would really encourage you to kind of rethink that approach, because emailing or personalizing or whatever based on data that's a year or two old is really going to decrease the effectiveness of your campaigns. Of course, there are probably exceptions out there with certain types of products and so forth that you want to consider. But as a rule of thumb, you really want to work with data from at least the last 12 months. And then finally, segmenting and personalizing all your campaigns, and all includes promotional campaigns, really is a basic and a best practice today. So if you're not doing that, I would really encourage you to figure out how you start doing it. It may be working for you on the short term, but it is going to cause churn, and it's going to cause the overall sustainability of your email program to decline over time. And we know from data that segmenting personalization and personalizing, I should say, helps decrease that. All right, so let's move on. Our next key finding is centered around unsubscribes and how do you prevent churn. So we asked, if you decide to unsubscribe, what, if anything, can the company do to keep you? And really, to no surprise, 41% of people said, you can't, I'm going to unsubscribe, and that's fine. And I think, Melissa, I think you agree with this, is that if people want to unsubscribe, that's actually good because they're selecting themselves out. You can stop sort of wasting your time on them, spending money, sending them messages. So don't look at that as an overall negative. But what's exciting is almost an equal amount of people said that they're willing to stay on your list if you give them some options, and those options being both content and frequency control. And if you start to dive down in the data lower, you'll see that the number of people that kind of fit into this group is actually more like 60%. So that's a huge opportunity for you to put some pretty basic tactics and options in for people that you can adhere to and save a lot of subscribers from leaving your program. So let's look at a few real-world examples. So here's what Alan Edmonds does. When one goes to unsubscribe or update their preferences, they're presented with this page. And so as you saw in the data, the top response was, give me the option to receive emails less frequently. And so Alan Edmonds is actually doing exactly that. They call it out as receive fewer emails. Reduce my emails is the call to action. And so that's a quick way for subscribers to kind of get diverted and select some different options. And of course, they do have a direct unsubscribe option on there too, which is super important. You don't want to prevent or hide the unsubscribe from people. Number one, that can start to be out of compliance with canned spam, but it's also not a good user experience either. Okay, the next example is centered around an opt-down survey. So this is from Blinds Galore. So they have the unsubscribe and change your preferences, but they also have a survey that goes along with this that helps them guide how they're changing their program. So I like this personally, this combination of give people some quick things they can respond to, and they've done that in the form of some radio buttons here. But they also have an open text field that someone can actually give them more specific feedback, and that's probably providing them with some pretty interesting reading material, I would imagine. All right, moving on. So now looking at a preference center. This is from Take Part. And similar to the art.com example, they've started to incorporate images of the types of content they can use. So they're allowing not only frequency, but content and interest type preferencing, which again is super important. They have a load of content they could be pushing to their subscribers, but I'm sure all of you on the phone today, I know I and Melissa and Kim have specific things we're interested in and we might feel more passionately about, and that's what they're trying to get at with their preference center. It's another great example of how they're letting subscribers control frequency and content. All right, so once you've prevented people from unsubscribing, you've gotten them to preference themselves, and so forth, you're still going to have a bucket of subscribers that are just on your list but not opening, not engaging. And that is where the reactivation campaign comes in. And so this is another example from Take Part, but we like it because it has some humor in it, and it kind of stands out from their regular communications, which is the whole goal of a reactivation campaign. So, obviously you're probably parking these people on the side for a little bit, letting them rest, and then sending them a message like this that gets them to either re-engage, tell you more about themselves, or opt themselves out, so you kind of know which way they're going to go, and then you can move on as well.
So to recap, there's good news and bad news here. The bad news is that about 40% of people who go to unsubscribe will actually complete that action. But as Chris said, it's not a bad thing to be cleaning those people out of your file. So focusing on the opportunity, that means that 60% of people who attempt to unsubscribe can actually be saved. And the way that you do that is by offering them choices. So make it easy for them to opt down, to change their frequency preferences, to let you know what kind of content they want to hear from you. And then the other important thing to remember here is that it's absolutely critical to have some automated programs in place to deal with people at the tail end of the customer life cycle. So to identify people who are no longer opening and clicking your campaigns, sending them a reactivation series. Same thing with win back, looking at people who are not purchasing or haven't purchased with you in a significant length of time, getting back in front of them, trying to get some sign of life by offering up a particularly compelling offer. And then the other thing that I really like to emphasize here too is not just waiting until the point at which you've actually lost that subscriber, but putting some guidelines in place to identify those early signs of churn. So when are people just beginning to lose interest, and then set up an early churn mitigation program. So you're reaching out and you're proactively asking them, what do you want to hear about in the campaigns that you receive from us? So again, we're following through on that theme of really listening to customer behavior and offering up a lot of choices. So now we're going to switch gears and shift into a section that I know all of you are probably very anxious to hear about, and that is consumer views on mobile marketing. We have some really fantastic data here, and Chris is going to kick us off.
Great. So our first question we were asked is, how likely are you to purchase on a mobile phone or tablet? And this is probably the $10 million question email marketers are trying to figure out right now. So, some good and some not so good news here. I'll start with the latter. So 29% of people said they're not likely to purchase on a mobile device. So, that's not a majority of people, but it's certainly higher than the people that are interested in purchasing. The one thing I did want to call out, though, is 53%, so a lot, of 18 to 24-year-olds are likely to purchase on a mobile device. So obviously some generational and device adoption differences going on there. But great call out for email marketers to segment. Most of you know the ages of your subscribers, and that's a great way to kind of give different experiences to people and get them to leverage your mobile checkout processes. So we wanted to, again, look at what people say they're going to do versus what they're actually doing. And in this case, looking at some data from Columbia Sportswear, they were nice enough to share, we're seeing the data kind of aligns with what customers say. And that is that on desktop, they're getting much more from a conversion perspective, a straight conversion rate, but they're also getting a lot more revenue and a higher average order value. So mobile is pretty significant for them, but desktop is still beating mobile and tablet by a large amount.
So we didn't just ask people, are you likely to purchase on a mobile device? We also dug a little bit deeper to try to get at the reasons why people are hesitant to purchase on a mobile phone or tablet, and the results were really, really enlightening. So the biggest reason that people don't purchase on a mobile device is they say they're just more comfortable on a desktop or laptop. Following right behind that is actually security concerns. So that's something really important to emphasize in your messaging on your checkout page, for example, and throughout your email campaigns. You really want to proactively address those security concerns and let your audience know that it is safe and secure to purchase on their mobile device. And then we also saw what we expected to see, which is that some people think it's very difficult to navigate through the checkout process or to actually type in the information when they're on their mobile phone. So for marketers, that really underscores the importance of creating that great relationship between the email marketing team and the team that owns your website. So you're not just designing the most beautiful, responsive email experience possible, but you're looking at that experience end to end. You're thinking holistically about what happens when you drop off that email subscriber onto your site and what happens there. So we've got an example here for you from Zazzle. They do a particularly effective job of creating a really streamlined process, checking out from the email to the mobile site. So you can see that this is very elegant. All of the calls to action are very bold. It's easy to tap through here with just your fingertip, and they've really eliminated a lot of extra steps. They've made it really simple to make that purchase online.
All right, so let's look at some quick action items and hot tips for this area. So the overall theme is that you really need to consider the end-to-end experience, whether one is checking out on a desktop and regular website, or if they're checking out on your mobile site. You really need to accommodate both. Remember that people are using their thumbs now to click on your email, so making them simple and easy to interact with is super important. And then finally, as Melissa highlighted a couple slides ago, the second highest response, almost 41% of people said that they won't check out because of security concerns on mobile websites or mobile devices. So the more you can do to enforce that that's a secure and safe way to check out using credit cards and so forth, the more likelihood you are going to break down that barrier for your subscribers. All right, so taking it one level deeper, we did ask people from an age perspective, where do they prefer to purchase from using a mobile phone and tablet. So there's kind of a, do people care about a mobile website or a mobile app question out there. So here's what our respondents said. The youngest demographic, 18 to 24, kind of were the most flexible. So there's kind of an equal amount of they like the website, the app, or they don't care. So those folks are obviously a lot more adaptable to how they work. The other call that I was going to make is that 60% of our oldest demographic, which was 55 to 64, really had no preference. And our kind of assumption and hypothesis, if you will, on that is that they probably haven't checked out on these devices as much as younger demographics, and therefore they have less of a preference over which one they use.
So this is an example from a company called Guilt, which is a brand that I absolutely love, and they have this fantastic app that makes it super easy to check out. So you can see how clean and elegant this is, how easy it is to tap through. It's just a very crisp experience. The other thing I really wanted to call out here is they've done something very innovative in the checkout process where they have an option to import your address from your contacts. So they just make it so simple for you so you don't really have to key in as much information. So this is great. We did notice, however, we tried checking out on Guilt. If you want to flip to the next slide, Chris. It's okay. So we tried the experience of checking out on the mobile site, so not the app, but the mobile site from an email. And when I did this on my iPhone 6, it looked absolutely beautiful. But when Kim did this on her iPhone 4S, you can see that it's completely broken, and there's no way as a consumer that you could follow this. So this is just another important reminder about how complex it is to execute on these tactics these days, and how absolutely critical it is that you're doing a thorough job of QAing the experience and making sure that you're checking to see what your consumers are experiencing when they're on all different types of devices and in different environments. So we've got one more key finding on the mobile side, and this is a question that we've asked for a number of years, and that is, if you receive an email on your mobile phone or tablet and it doesn't display correctly, what do you do? And this has always been really interesting to us. Historically, in 2014, we saw that a huge percentage, 71%, said they would actually delete the email. And this year, we were a bit surprised to see that fewer people said they would actually delete the message. So does that mean we're kind of off the hook? We don't need to pay attention as much? I don't think so. I think people are just getting more used to and more comfortable with this whole idea of mobile rendering, but the bar is still really high, right? So mobile adoption is increasing. It's more important than ever before for marketers to think about how their campaigns look across different devices. And then echoing a theme that we've had throughout this data, we did see a slight variation based on age. So if your population that you're mailing to skews a little bit older, it's really important to know that folks in the 55 to 64 age group were much more likely. 51% of those people said they were likely to delete if the email doesn't display correctly. So as people age, they're getting less tolerant of a bad user experience. So something to keep in mind. So we've got a great example here from Harry and David. This is actually a responsive design, not a mobile-first design. So you can see on the left what the email looks like when it's opened on a desktop, and on the right you can see what it looks like when it's opened on a mobile device. And that first content element just shrinks down, but then those three side-by-side images actually stack so that they're easier to view. The call to action is very tappable. So they're doing a really beautiful job of making it easy for consumers to read, review, react to their campaigns regardless of the device that they're on. All right, so to recap the action items around mobile, we highly encourage everyone out there to adopt a mobile-first approach. Take that time to have a look at your specific audience, dig into the data, figure out what percentage of your subscribers are viewing campaigns on a mobile device, and use that information to help you decide how far to go in terms of responsive design. Make sure that you're doing a really thorough QA process, test and validate that messaging, and then use the data, right? So have a look at response metrics by device and use that information to help guide you and let you know if you have any problems with the actual experience converting from a mobile device. So shifting gears as we're winding down and recapping here, and we'll move into questions in just a moment. The key leave-behinds that we want you to focus on as we wrap it up are that consumers are becoming incredibly savvy. They are expecting you to personalize their communications and to provide them with meaningful choices. It's more important than ever before to listen to consumers, to watch their behavior, and to hone in on who your best customers are and really offer them different frequency and different types of offers. On the flip side, you want to have checks and balances in place so you can identify people that may be showing signs of inactivity and really mitigating that churn before it happens and providing that option for people to opt down.
All right, so quickly looking at the key takeaways on the mobile usage section of our presentation today. A couple of key takeaways. Number one, make sure all of your emails are rendering properly and are actionable across devices. We saw the example from Guilt, where on an iPhone 6 it works great, on an iPhone 4S not so great in terms of their checkout process. So really make sure you're using diagnosis and analysis tools that help you ensure proper rendering and experience across the spectrum in terms of how people are accessing your site. As a number one step, make sure you're taking a mobile-first approach at a minimum. We cannot emphasize that enough. And then, ideally, you're moving towards a responsive design if possible. And then finally, just reinforcing this, ensure that you have a seamless and friction-free experience, whether that's reading content in your emails, clicking through your site, or actually procuring your products from your emails.
Great. Thanks, Chris. We've got a lot of great questions. We are running a little slim on time, so we'll try to get to all of you. This one is from Chuck, and it's in regards to symbols in the subject lines. He says that he's been trained that using symbols in subject lines don't show up in all email programs, or some ESPs don't even allow them to be included in subject lines. Is this true, and do you have any opinions about symbols in subject lines?
Chris,
I'll throw that to you, Melissa. Sure.
Okay. So yes, subject lines render differently in different environments, so that is something that you want to be aware of. There are some email clients where they will just render as a character, like a little box. So that's something you need to take into account when you're testing this. But I would say, in my experience, about 70% of the time they do render. So you have to weigh that out against the value of the lift that you might get versus a couple of people not having a great experience. And for the most part, I think most ESPs do allow you to insert that symbol in the subject line.
Yeah,
right.
On the latter point, I would say that's my experience as well.
Here's another one from Kathy. What's the difference between mobile first and responsive design? And I'll throw that at you, Chris.
Sure. So mobile first is really you're still sticking to one version of your email, if you will, in terms of coding and display. But you're taking into account a narrower template, if you will, larger buttons, less copy. You're kind of trying to make it work in both environments in terms of a mobile experience as well as a desktop experience. From a responsive design perspective, that's where you're actually coding a responsive template and version of your content within your overall template, and then actually rendering the right one based on what device somebody's looking at. So you would end up with essentially two complete different experiences. If I first open your email on a desktop and then later in the day I look at your email on my mobile phone, I'm going to see a completely different version that's pared down and more mobile friendly versus a traditional desktop experience.
Any comment, Melissa?
Yeah, so the thing that I would urge you to think about is, first of all, just look at your audience and the age of your audience and the actual composition of your audience when people are opening on mobile devices versus desktops. There is a cost. I'll be upfront about that. There's a cost to responsive design. It takes a little bit more effort. And when you're thinking about that example, for example, that Harry and David example, as a marketer, that may force you to have to create some hierarchy in your messaging and think about what messages may drop out of the mobile version. So think about those trade-offs. But as Chris said, at a minimum, everyone should be doing that mobile first. And then I really like to start with the automated programs or lifecycle programs for responsive design because you get a real bang for your buck there. You design it once and then it's working for you all the time. And then think about your audience. If you're PacSun and you're catering to a younger audience, it may be absolutely critical for you to be adopting responsive design. So there are decisions that you'll need to make based on your specific audience.
Thanks. Here's another one. This is from Dan. What were the biggest surprises in the research? And I'll throw that back to you, Melissa.
So there were a couple that really jumped out at me. The first one was just the number of people that say they're checking email constantly throughout the day. That's really shifted over the last couple of years. So we're seeing that behavior where people are so tied into their devices. There's data showing, email is sometimes the first thing people do when they wake up before they even get out of their bed. They're grabbing their cell phone and checking their email. I have to confess that I sometimes do that myself. So it's really shifting the interaction that we have as marketers with our audience, and just driving home that point of making sure that we're communicating in a way that consumers can easily see and respond to our messages regardless of where they are and what device they're on. So that real call to action to just be very responsive across devices.
How about you, Chris?
I would say, I have two. One is a quick one where, we're really seeing people reduce the number of email accounts that they had. I think that's super exciting. But the really big one was the openness to frequency that our consumer panel said they had. And that, I think that is amazing in terms of opportunity that provides to email marketers.
And could I just jump in with one last comment? Is also
Sure.
The expectations that consumers have around personalization now, that was so clear and such a sharp contrast to what we've seen in previous years. So there really is an openness and an expectation from consumers. So the bar is raised for marketers for sure.
That's a great one.
All right. Well, we are just about at the end of our hour. I want to thank you all for joining us today, and I hope you found this session informative and gathered some helpful takeaways that you can use to optimize your email marketing program. We will have the second part of this webinar series next Thursday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. We will be covering what consumers say about email's influence on their purchasing behavior, and also cover social and email. So we hope you enjoyed the session. We enjoyed it ourselves. I hope you got a lot out of it, and we hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you.